Scrolling to find out what this thing is up, especially from the community.
Add something. Yeah, the students have to add because those overachievers. Yep. They include something.
Every now and then I'll.
Yeah.
Am I jumping in there, Janie? Wow, getting some feedback. Thank you. That was me. My bad.
Yes.
Just gonna speak.
No.
Oh, it's just the name.
Yeah.
Don't have the application, do you?
I do not.
I got that printed. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the appointed hour of 7 o'clock on Thursday, March 16th. Welcome all. And a hearty St. Patrick's Day, in case you haven't started preparing, I encourage you to do so in celebration. Before I call the meeting to order, if there's anyone who plans to speak tonight, would invite you to sign in on one of our sign-up sheets over here, either on matters on the agenda or for citizens' remarks and comments. At this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask that you all please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. Next item on the agenda is consideration of the agenda. I'm not aware of any changes or additions. And unless there's an objection, we will approve the agenda as presented. It is approved. Next item, proclamations. I would like to invite employees of the local health department, Jan and Heather, to join me up front for this proclamation. These are the young ladies that through the short straw. I've got fun hanging out with city council. Thank you all for being here. And I'd like to make this proclamation recognizing April 3 through 9, 2023 as National Public Health. Whereas the President of the United States traditionally dedicates the first full week of April as National Public Health Week. Whereas National Public Health Week is scheduled for 3 to 9. 2023, and the theme is centered and celebrating culture and health. And whereas since 1995, the American Public Health Association, through sponsorship of National Public Health Leaders, has educated the public, policymakers, public health professionals about the importance of improving the public health. Whereas the Central Shenandoah Health Association has and to promote the health and well-being of residents in the Central Shenandoah Valley. And whereas the Central Shenandoah Health District serves the counties of Augusta, Bath, Highland, Rockbridge, and Washington, and the cities of Buena Vista, Harrisonburg, Lexington, Stanton, and Waynesburg, with an estimated combined population of 302,875. And whereas the Central Shenandoah Health District public health professionals help our community prevent, prepare for, withstand, and recover from the impact of a whole range of health threats, including disease outbreaks such as the COVID-19 pandemic, natural disasters, and disasters caused by human activity. And whereas the Central Shenandoah Health District public health professionals have and continue to display an unprecedented commitment to serve our communities and respond an estimated 100,306 drug overdose deaths in the United States during a 12-month period, the highest level ever reported from the 12-month period. And this was an increase of 28.5% from the 78,066 deaths during the same period in the report. Now therefore, we, the mayor and the Lexington City Council, call upon all citizens of Lexington to observe the week of April 3 through 9, 2023, as National Public Health Week, during which our residents will join in celebrating dedication of our public health professionals, past and present, and their families, which support allows them to serve our community. Adopted the 16th day of March, 2023. Thank you, congratulations, and thank you.
But I have traveled my district, and the men and women of this district serve you well, and we're happy to do it. I heard the story, and not one of them was not happy to do that. Very good. Thank you.
And talking with Jan, she's a Natural Bridge rocket. Told her that if she wanted to rocket out of here after the proclamation, she was welcome to do so. But thankful for their work and for them being with us this evening. Next presentations, I'd like to call on Eric Wilson of the Rockbridge Historical Society. And for our minute in history. Good evening and welcome.
Should work. Mike in a okay spot. Sounds like it. Good to see you all. Thank you all, several of you, by the way, for coming on February 28th to Downing. It was a good day, a celebration of our city schools and community history. We appreciate the support of City Council and in the schools, obviously, but also the Historical Society is very memorable. So thanks for making that effort early in the morning. We are almost dead in the middle of Women's History Month, right between the Ides of March and St. Patrick's Day. And we're 10 days out from what will be the fourth Rockbridge Historical Society Women's History Walking Tour. So that will be on, there are the details, Sunday, March 26th. It's a 90-minute walking tour. It's free. It's open to everyone in the community. It's all on downtown Main Street sidewalks in the front campus of Washington and Lee. So it's accessible. People can duck in and out, though hopefully they can enjoy the full arc. We've really grown it over the past couple of years, not only in terms of broadening a broader and more inclusive range of women to talk about, but of community partners, museums, historical organizations, universities and schools. We've got 8 presenters this year. So we're going to click through those pretty quick in 90 minutes. We'll start at our museum. We go through several stations and we'll end at First Baptist Church for some final presentations there and a chance to look at some other displays. We hope you all can come. We hope you invite 2 people. Good things happen in threes. So here are just a few quick portraits. This is one woman, Ruth Floyd Anderson McCullough, born in 1876, died in 1971. It's a long arc of history. I love these 2 pictures on the left, not least because they're taken by Michael Miley, himself a noted local photographer. By the time on the right, she's become an eminent leader in the community. She co-founded the Rockbridge Historical Society. She co-founded the Blue Ridge Garden Club. She co-founded the Ignorance Club, which was actually a very learned club of ladies sharing research, writing, really pioneering work. She's a foundational local historian. Her books have continued to lay foundations for our work, and you can see one of her paving stones right outside our museum. Here on the left, 3 educators, 3 notable ones. I probably presented on the left last year. Coralie Franklin Cook was born enslaved here in Lexington, would have attended the Freedman School right there, right where the stables are, became the chair of the oratory department at Howard University, where in fact she taught the woman in the middle. Figure we're continuing to research more. Lucy Diggs Slow was not born here. She was born in Berryville, 1885. When she was orphaned, she moved here with her sister to live with her aunt, Martha Price. She stayed here till age 13. So she really had her formative educational years here until her formative education had to stop because she was 13 and Black children could not get higher education beyond that. She goes to Baltimore, graduates second in her class at a very prestigious school, gets a scholarship to Howard University, quickly becomes the valedictorian at Howard University. Her senior year at Howard, she founds Alpha Kappa Alpha Incorporated sorority. And within a decade, she is invited back, not just to be an English professor there, but becomes the first Black African-American dean of women at any American university. And her schooling takes shape here. And it's pretty remarkable that she was taught oratory by the woman on the left, okay, two Lexington ties. Many of you will know Pam Simpson, know her well. She was a colleague of mine. I taught with her. She too is a founding figure, foundational figure at the Rockbridge Historical Society and many others in the area. And this year's tour, we're focusing on education as a theme. So we're clustering these people there. In effect, we have 3 deans here, senior female administrators who are shaping their institutions and generations of women and men who come with them. This is a bit more about SLO. I gave you some of those details here. What I didn't tell you is that in the midst of all this academic careering, founding things like the National Association for College Women, and there are about 5 more acronyms. She's one of these alphabet women who just keeps organizing and building groups. But I think in 1917, she becomes the first national champion of the American Tennis Association. First Black woman to win any major sports title of that era. So again, the arc of that is part of a local story. It's part of a national story, and it's certainly part of the story about an arc of education. We want this year to make sure we're focusing not simply on individuals, but on institutions. You see Lilburn Downing School at the left, and one of its graduates and one of its teachers, Louise Johnson Michael, at the dedication last summer at Juneteenth. On the right, what was from 1907 to 54, Stonewall Jackson Memorial Hospital. And so we'll be looking at the collective work of the women who brought that to become a hospital, and to fundraise, to nurse, to administrate that institution, and seeing that kind of collective work. Coeducation will be a big theme. We've got representatives both from Washington and Lee and BMI to tell that story in great breadth. On the left, 1997, a young woman in Cameron Hall signing her name in the matriculation book to become a member of the first sort of full class of women. The picture on the right is a woman at the ring figure ceremony. It would be 20 years later, 2017. These stories continue to evolve in individual ways and collective ways. We're glad to tell them, and we're glad to learn from them. Each time we do this tour, we get stories from other people in important new ways. So again, there's information on our website. This will be Sunday, March 26th. We'll start at 2 p.m. We hope there won't be snow, but who knows? Who really knows? And I believe that is it. Thank you.
Terrific. Eric, thank you. And thank you for the stroll down memory lane of Juneteenth and that vivacious teacher and alum that spoke. It's a lot of good things going on and a lot of good memories here. So any questions for Eric from council members? Mark your calendars, 2 p.m., March 26th. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for your work in the Historical Society. Thank you, sir. Next item on the agenda, public hearings, and we have a public hearing in consideration of a request from Pearson Hotchkiss to adjust property boundary line. And I'd like to call on the city manager for introduction of this business.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Glazer, our Director of Planning, is not with us this evening, so I will take this and note to you that it's a fairly straightforward issue. Mr. and Mrs. Kirshner at 505 Pickett Street are requesting a boundary line adjustment. They own the lot at 505 and the adjacent vacant lot. They'd like to take 0.19 acres from the vacant lot and add it to their home at 505 Pickett Both lots meet the full requirements of the zoning ordinance. The vacant lot would still have over 5,000 square feet of buildable space available once this small sliver is removed from that lot. The planning director did, of course, review this request, and it meets all the zoning requirements. The planning commission reviewed it and does recommend it to the to the city council for approval. And I'll take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, sir. Members of council have any questions? Hearing none at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. There was no one that signed up, but is there anyone who would like to speak on this matter regarding the public hearing for the boundary line adjustment on Pickett Street? Seeing no one desiring to speak at 7:15, I'll close the public hearing and ask for council's consideration.
I move to approve the permit request to change the to adjust the property line at 505 Pickett Street.
Second.
Have a motion second. Any discussion? Hearing none, a roll call vote. Mr. Alligood,
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Mr. Betts.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, and Kirchners, enjoy your new boundary lines. Pearson, thanks for being with us. Next item on the agenda is consideration of minutes. Those were in your packet from March 2nd work session with the Planning Commission and also the regular meeting. And those were provided to you in your packet prior to the meeting. Are there any changes or concerns related to the minutes? Hearing none, unless there's an objection, we will have the minutes stand approved as presented. And they are approved. Next item on the agenda is citizens' remarks and comments. We welcome folks to come and address council and share with us good news, bad news, things that are on your mind, and just keeping in touch. And did have one person who has signed up, and I'd invite Betty Beazle to come address council. Welcome, Betty. Should say welcome back.
Mayor.
And if you would state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Betty Beazle. I live at 120 Chavis Avenue. That's in the Fairwinds neighborhood. And I'm also serving on the tree board, and I'm here to make a statement from the tree board tonight. And if I may, can I introduce the tree board members that are here with me tonight?
Certainly.
They couldn't all make it, but if you could just please stand. There's Pamela White, Janice Friend, and over here on this side is David Rocher. They're all here with me tonight to discuss with you some of what we know about the pruning work, clearing work that happened at Jordan's Point Park over the last couple of weeks. I'll provide some background, not that any of you probably need it, but some others in the audience might, and that this work was based on the Jordan's Point Master Plan that was developed with a lot of community input in 2020. Before it was adopted, there was many community meetings that happened and a number of concept plans that were submitted before the final one was finally adopted. And I know it has been an interest in the city to move along with this plan. In fact, they dedicated it as a catalyst plan, meaning we might not have the money right now to proceed with this plan or the staff, but whenever we can, we will take small steps toward what that plan encourages us to do. So this was one of those ideas that Public Works could do now, I understand, because they haven't started mowing yet. And I think it started out as a very good plan. It had the involvement of the city arborist, the Public Works crew, Louise Finger of the Department of Wildlife Resources. And the basic idea was to improve the trail that's at the head of the park, the island, I mean, and that goes around that sort of what I call the top, the upstream end of the island, and to do some opening of areas there so that more people could see the river, enjoy the view of a river. We have a beautiful view, and sometimes the only best place to see it is from the bridge, as you know. So those were good ideas. There were agreements among the parties, and there were a number of meetings that happened before this project was started. One that was that the city arborist would be present when the work was done. The plan was to, first of all, just open up some areas by removing trees under 4 inches in diameter. And the arborist, Celia Rainey, had the good idea of, while we're here, let's go ahead and get rid of a lot of invasives that are growing amongst these trees. And they can be cut, their stumps can be treated, and we can later replant with a native understory through this area. To that end, she spent probably half a day, I can only guess, flagging all the native trees that are along there. And they have white flagging on them. You can still see many of them. And that there was to be no plant removal in the very vulnerable area between the trail and the river. Now, we're pretty complacent now. The river's way down there since the dam went out. So our flood hazard is probably reduced. But all those plants are part of what we call a riparian buffer. They have 2 functions. They filter stormwater as it flows into the river, keeping the river clean, and they hold that bank if the water ever gets high. So they're important plants. Unfortunately, this plan was not put in writing. I will now address the work that was done. And while I am addressing it, I will try to I won't speculate. I know some of the reasons that it went bad. First of all, despite the agreement, the city arborist was not present when the work was done. On the day that work started, March 2nd, she was in her office writing a grant. The work crews understood that she was to be called and on site, and they did not call her. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, she found out that this work had progressed without her. She went down and found that about 150-foot area below the overlook, going upstream, had been cleared and many large trees had been removed. And I would like to just address some of the comments of the city manager that he made in his letter to the editor that was in yesterday's paper. Some of these were classified as poor tree specimens or non-beneficial trees. And I really think that's up to the arborist to decide that. Actually, every tree in a riparian buffer is valuable because it's working. The invasives were not treated. And there was ground disturbance in the floodplain. We have a new floodplain now near the sluice gate where the Miller's Run goes in. The river is much reduced, but there is a large flat area that it is becoming a new floodplain. There are trees growing in it. There was the beginning of plants, some nice native plants. And these were damaged during a cleanup that happened there of some driftwood or some kind of things that had washed in. Now, it is true that the sluice gate to the Millrace, thank you, needs to be kept open. That is a floodway now. It's really not flowing actively, but it will be a floodway if the water ever gets high. Unfortunately, the area that was disturbed was downstream somewhat from that, and it is now bare ground. So it is really vulnerable. If the river goes up a foot or two, that bare ground is very susceptible to erosion. So the arborist was not called initially on the day work began. On March 6th, at her request, she was called down to site, and many of her requests were ignored at that day. No invasives were treated. The crews to her seemed insensitive to the number of wildflowers that were coming out, and she thought there was an excess use of equipment under there. She called them on that, and she was pretty much ignored. She addressed this with her supervisors and the crew about what to do better next time. And she had the assurance that the next stretch of work that would be done would be continuing further up around the bend. There would be no work on the river side of the trail. And a large sycamore would be removed. They had all agreed to that. It was half dead. And when she left town for 2 days to attend a Virginia Urban Forest Council board, she's on the board there now, retreat, she came back on Thursday or Wednesday and found there was indeed much disturbance near the mill race below that area. And also large areas of the bank right above that floodplain had been cleared of their trees. And this, of course, is really vulnerable because once the river crosses that floodplain, that's what it hits. And now we have a 4-foot bank with no vegetation on it. Okay, so that's the extent. And I just have to ask in general, it was a good plan to start with. Yes, it fell apart. Was the scope of removal really necessary for 2 picnic tables and possibly 2 benches? I'm not sure of the vision there. And I would like to also stress the city manager's letter, mentioned aesthetics, but there's more to a site like this than aesthetics. We might not all agree about wild versus completely cleared, but I think between there, we can find a better ground than what's been found now. Now the consequences. The repair and remediation will be larger than anticipated. The plan was to replace some of the trees that were removed, the smaller trees, and to establish a new shrub riparian border of native plants. Well, since the invasives were never treated with herbicide, they will resprout. They will have to be recut. The riparian buffer, as I said, especially Riverside, is bare ground. It's vulnerable. And most galling to me is that the arborist is now tasked with coming up with a remediation plan, even though her advice was ignored. Okay, where do we go from here? The Jordan's Point plan, I hadn't looked at it in a while, the master plan, has lots of great ideas in it. Some of them are a little outlandish, like, did you know one recommendation was to clear trees so that people on the Route 11 bridge could see the park? I don't know if I agree with that. And then this idea of opening up stretches of views. Are we talking 2 picnic tables? Are we talking 12? Are we talking about picnic tables on concrete benches? So we have a plan. Where do we go with it next? Who will say what happens next? I hope that there will be more community input and professional advice before our next steps. And I ask council to consider how that could happen. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you, Betty. During the public comments, it's just comments, so we don't typically engage in discussion or debate. But there's a lot to unpack with that, and certainly the bulk of it, it sounds like, is personnel issues that management needs to vet and understand. And I know the city manager will take on that task of meeting with the arborist and working with her and working with staff to make sure that we're collaborating, not just at the beginning, but through the whole process to have a better outcome. But greatly appreciate the service that you provide in the past to the city, and certainly now on the tree board and your peers on the tree board as well. Greatly appreciate you being here.
Thank you. And if you have any other questions, please contact me.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to council this evening on any particular topic? Yes, ma'am. Please come forward. We record our meetings, and well, welcome. And if you could please state your name and address for the record.
Pamela White, 605 Lime Kiln Road, Lexington, and I'm a member of the tree board. And just, it's a follow-up to what Betty has presented. I have questions or comments for the future. One is, yes, clearly there's a question of collaboration and who is responsible and how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again. There's also a question of vision. what are we doing with this space and who determines that? And what are we doing with that? And my third question is, a person from the Department of Wildlife was brought in and consulted and apparently not heard, or what her recommendations were not followed. Why was she called in if we weren't listening to her? And what is the importance of these recommendations and the counsel that she gave us? Not everybody has a vested interest in a riparian buffer. Many of us don't know what it is or what purpose it serves. But if we're pulling in experts, why aren't we listening to them? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to council this evening? Hearing none, we'll close the citizens' remarks at 7:30 and move to our next item on the agenda, the consent agenda. It was details provided in your packet for peddler license waiver on August 26th and a street closure for Sunday, April 2nd.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, and I'd ask for a roll call vote. Ms. Alexander,
Aye.
Mr. Smith, Ms. Strawn,
Aye.
Mr. Betts,
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler,
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Mark your calendars for the community festival on the 26th, and it's always fun to wander down the streets of Lexington when they're closed on April 2nd. Yes, April 2nd. Next item on the agenda is unfinished business, review and consideration of amending the noise ordinance. And I'd like to call the city manager for introduction of this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Of course, we've gone over this topic several times. This is basically an update revision from the comments and concerns, questions that came from city council at our last meeting when this was considered. The attorney and I looked this over in some detail. I will just point out some of the changes that were made as a reminder, and some of those that were made basically based on comments and questions at the last council meeting. You can see on page 1 of 11, 2 of 12, second page of this item, is that there is a definition of activity permit. And that's pretty much the same as we've seen before, but it's very important to what we're trying to accomplish here in the ordinance. Another issue under definitions is main campus. You'll see on page 3 that was put in place to better describe the areas of both Washington and Lee and VMI universities as it relates to activities there and areas of the campus that may or may not be covered by this noise ordinance. Page 4 under administration and enforcement A, you'll see a highlighted area that says the police department shall develop and issue an activity permit. That's just to clarify that one would be developed and who would develop that permit. Since it is enforced by the police department, they'll be responsible for doing that. Just a further clarification on page 5 of the people who host the activity will draw the permit and why they would be getting a permit because of the activities such as broadcasting music, human voices, other sounds that are amplified or otherwise. On to page 7. You can see there's another reference to commercial vehicles, trash collections, and it mentions the main campus of Virginia Military Institute or Washington Lee University. Basically, these items are exceptions. And so there is an exception for refuse pickup if you're on the main campus of those two entities. But if you're at a facility that's off the main campus, you have to abide by the noise ordinance and restrict your hours of operation. I did speak with Steve McAllister from Washington Lee. He has no problem making those changes in those outlying areas or outlying structures, facilities that they own to comply with this ordinance and these time restraints. I also spoke with the director of the hospital, and he also didn't have any problem living with these hours and was happy to delay the pickup there so it wouldn't bother the adjacent residential neighborhoods. You'll see just below that, it indicates a change of time for activities that are identified in a section that was put in there at the request of Councilmember Strawn, so that on Friday and Saturday nights, you could go an hour later and not have any problems with any kind of I won't say violations, there still could be violations, but the extent of the violations at the time frame. Following page also references that in B. And in page 10 of 12, exception C, in this particular case, there were some additions that specified or better clarified the city work activities that would be accepted, which include street sweeping, snow and ice removal, garbage pickup, and similar activities. Of course, I guess you could include also in their water line repair, if we understand that, you know, that has to be done sometimes at 3 a.m. and equipment will be out doing that. So those types of activities that are necessary on too many occasions, unfortunately, after hours. Again, at K, the next page, it talks about band performances. And again, we've added the clause on the main campus of VMI and Washington and Lee. If they had the bands out at a frat house practicing next to the adjacent residential areas, that would be under the ordinance. If you're on the campus itself and the band is practicing on the athletic fields, then that would not be a violation of this ordinance as we have provided it to you. Those are some of the highlights of changes and areas of interest that were either added to the ordinance or revised during earlier conversations or at the last city council meeting. Some of those perhaps have some legal nuances, and I'll ask the city attorney if he wants to comment on those.
First comment I want to make is there was one other change that is reflected in the first section, the findings and policy, section 275-1. There had been some language in there that said any noise disturbance is a nuisance that the town or the city can abate through its police powers. I changed that, or suggested changing that terminology from noise disturbance, which is not a defined term, to noise that violates the ordinance, to make it clear that it would actually have to violate the ordinance to rise to the level of a nuisance. Other than that, I think Jim is appropriately addressed all of the changes we've made. The largest one was the definition of a main campus and providing that trucks, trash trucks and band performances on the main campus would not be a violation of the ordinance. The ordinance still preserves both the civil and the criminal violations, so you can civilly enforce when there's a violation of the plainly audible standard, which there's case law on, but which is not sufficient to justify or support a criminal conviction. You have to use the decibel meters to establish a criminal violation. And so that maintains that opportunity for the city to engage in enforcement actions civilly when it doesn't have the necessary equipment for decibel meters to enforce criminally. Happy to answer any questions. I like I said, I think Jim covered the changes and the reasoning for the changes very well, and so happy to answer any questions.
Thank you all for that presentation. Ms. Strawn.
I had one on, first of all, the ordinance looks good. I appreciate y'all making the changes that we had suggested at the last meeting. For the activity permit, last time we talked about the main purpose of the activity permit was really just to have a point of contact, but I wasn't clear. Does that give you some leeway on going above the limits? I was looking at page, well, I'll ask you that question.
It does not. As drafted, the activity permit is exactly that. It gives a point of contact for the chief. And it also puts the person who's applied for and received the activity permit, you know, you get an opportunity to explain to them the rules of the road, if you will.
Okay,
But it does not create an exception. Jim and I actually had that specific conversation as we were going through this,
okay,
making sure whether it was intended to create an exception or not, and it does not.
okay.
Basically, you will still have the 10 o'clock shut off time if you have an outdoor.
And what, so at the top of page 44, when it says, in section B, provided, however, the provisions of this subsection shall not apply to outdoor performance, whatever, or other events sponsored by the city or for which the city has granted a permit. So does that just mean you can't get a criminal violation if you have a?
My pagination is different than yours.
Oh,
Ron, I
sorry,
apologize.
That's a great question because it's citing 275-4 and 5, which makes you exempt from civil and criminal penalties if you have a permit.
Which I
And
actually
and
don't-
Leslie, just to be clear,
That's what it says.
page 44 of the packet, which is page 7 of 11.
Yes, right. Page 8 of 12 or, yeah, we got, oh, we do have, you're right, 7 of 11. We've got 3 different numbering systems.
Take your pick.
Personally, I'm fine either way. I just wanted to understand what that meant exactly.
And that was item B.
Right, the last sentence on item B.
Reading it and recalling it and working off memory here, I thought that had to do with more like the parades going down Main Street kind of a thing with
So-
that kind of a city permit.
Okay, so not the
necessarily
activity
the
permit.
activity Permit, that
Okay.
may be an area. I think you touched on something that may warrant some clarification, certainly.
Okay,
Yeah, I completely took that differently than as you intended. I took it as we would like the public to get an activity permit and that there is a benefit to the public for getting an activity permit. And so as I read it, there is no benefit except putting someone in harm's way, essentially. So if you're a fraternity, by getting an activity permit, you're basically saying, gosh, when you all get after it and you get cited for a misdemeanor, they're going to come after me. So there might not be an incentive for a fraternity to offer up that individual to go get what we would like them to do, which we say they are required to do because there is no benefit. So it behoove them to ignore that because they're still getting a misdemeanor one way or the other. And it's just on the police to decide eeny, meeny, miny, mo, who do I cite rather than the person that put their name on the permit. I just.
I know that's, part of that is a policy argument, and I certainly
I-
understand what you're
I-
saying.
But if
The-
you're Chi Psi also, Chi Psi is on the main campus, that's the one fraternity that would be roped in and they'd be allowed to make extra noise, I guess. The way that we've drawn the main campus, it includes that one fraternity.
They're on the main campus.
Correct. Yeah. So but I just want to be very clear that we, because as I remember, the reason that we're developing, this ordinance is to really codify what we would like to see for our community. But I just don't want to unintentionally give a student a criminal record.
Sure. I'm not sure that on the Chi Psi example, because I think the only exceptions for the main campus are the trash trucks and then I guess it is the band performances. So I guess that's where it can get roped in. Again, I think maybe that's an area where we want to make some clarification. Obviously, we were talking or thinking about the the bands at university.
Sure. And then I have another question. As I tried to read through this, if the complainant has a window open, is it null and void? Is their complaint null and void? Because a violation can only occur if every door, every window is closed of their house and they can still hear noise. Is that right? So in theory, someone could say, wow, they had a window open. You have no grounds to cite me. Is that right?
I would say the standard is closed windows.
Yes, but I mean, we say it multiple times. So I'm just, again, clarifying that. Okay.
Well, I'm talking in from the plainly audible standard for the civil penalty, the standard would be the closed.
Well,
That's fine.
In actuality, it would be up to the judge to make that decision.
Yeah, I think they would
I mean-
apply, somebody would come and testify that what they heard and the circumstances of what they heard and how much, how loud it was, and the judge would make that decision based on the evidence, whether they thought that it was plainly audible inside of a residence. And yeah, so
An enclosed residence.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I was just wondering about 275-4 O. I was wondering if it would potentially make more sense to move that to the top of the section, because as you read through the section, it seems as though it's 10 o'clock until you get to the end and then you realize it's 11. So I don't know. I don't know that it has to be moved, but it might give some more clarity if somebody was looking down the code section.
Nick, which page is that on?
That would be page 6. of
6
11.
of 11.
11. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess, question for Jim or Chief Green. So our current policy right now is with the activity permit is as this is, that you just get it. It doesn't give you any leeway on violating.
That is correct. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to specify activity permit.
Yeah.
Some people have called it a noise permit. It's not a permit to make noise. It is an activity permit, and then you do fall under all the requirements of the code, of course. It's just, if the chief would like to elaborate, but that's how I understand it.
Okay. And that really, has it caused any problems? I worry that we're a college town. I don't want to be too restrictive. We have to have a little bit of leeway. But has that system worked?
I believe it has worked. Again, the chief can come up if you'd like and maybe comment on that more specifically.
Sure. I think that'd be helpful.
Good evening, Chief. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. So the activity permit, as the city manager stated and the attorney, doesn't give you a leeway. It's right here. It does state the current code on here. So it is a way for us to give an individual this permit, this activity permit that they can take with them and reread with the code of what they are allowed to do or not allowed to do, the decibels, or 50 feet enclosed or outdoors. And it does put a person's name on there. Only thing that does, as Councilman Ziegler kind of pointed out, that if we go to the home, we ask, is Angela Green here? Most of the time, Angela Green's nowhere to be found. Angela Green is not coming forward, not saying it, and that's fine. So yes, we do say who is on a lease, who is responsible, and we have to go through it. But again, the officers have always used this with or without this. It's going to be a warning. It's always a warning unless it's something very, very egregious. And I have not heard of any such event that has been that egregious that you don't at least get a warning first to come into compliance. And usually they're very lenient before they do give a summons. I've been here almost 2 years and there's only been one time that someone has been given a summons for loud noise.
Okay. So your feeling is this system works as it is right now?
As of right now, it does work. It would just be nice for repeat offenders to possibly have a little bit more bite to the current ordinance that we have, which is what I believe the city manager and the city attorney, interim city attorney, are doing to assist us, to help us out.
Thank you.
So will the activity permit be available online for them to complete? Or do they someone have to physically come to the police station between 8 and 5, Monday through Friday? They can't do,
We can make it online right now. I understand what you're saying. So much is done online. Right now, we do have them come in, and that's just for us to make sure that they understand, again, what this section is, that's what you can do and not do. But we can definitely do online to make it more convenient for individuals.
Will it still be a two-part where you fill out, I think, a green sheet and then you fill out the yellow sheet?
They usually just fill out this sheet and we make a copy for ourselves and we give them the copy.
We have a disorderly conduct law on the books right now, right?
Yes, sir.
Can you review that for me?
So usually the disorderly conduct, it is pretty vague right now, but that's out in a public area where you are usually causing some type of disturbance to the rest of the general public. So it is very vague, which a lot of times when you go to court, you as a police officer need to testify as to how an individual has caused a disruption, disorderly conduct. A lot of times people can use that as a fight or people arguing and cussing back and forth at each other, that it's disorderly conduct. Maybe they've had a little bit something to drink, but they might not be inebriated enough or drunk in public, so they might be causing a disturbance. So it's a very kind of vague term that officers usually just have to articulate if they do make an arrest and go to court.
And the offender has to be in a public space, not in a private space. Is that what I
Yes.
heard?
Yes, that should be one of the terms. Yes, inside your own home. And the interim city attorney can let me know, sometimes it can be elaborated, but normally within your own home, you can be agitated, screaming and yelling, but it gets to the point if you're yelling so loud and it is hearing to others, say an apartment building, or causing a disruption that where other individuals can hear it in that area, you can do a disorderly conduct. But if you're within your own home, most of the times we don't, unless it's that noisy and causing that much of a disruption.
Okay. Similarly, do we have anything on disturbing the peace, or does that fall under disorderly, or do we not have that at all?
There is probably, I'd have to check the city code ordinance, but I know generally that most state and local laws, there is like a disturbance of the peace, but that is one of those kind of catch-all laws. And again, I don't know.
I'd have to look at the city code on that one.
Right. I don't know per se the city code, but usually state and local codes do have a disturbance of the peace, but that is one of those kind of catch-alls, like the disorderly conduct.
Is there a reason why the criminal penalties are a class 1 and class 2 misdemeanor versus say a class 3 or class 4?
There was discussion about that a couple of months ago, and it was talked about dropping it down to a class 3. That is a change that has not been embodied in this version, but it certainly is a change that council could make.
And that would be in line with the county. That, because I remember, I mean, that was one of the things I brought up a few months ago. Threatening jail time, it's. So, but to be aligned with the county would be to drop it down.
Chief, do you have an opinion on that piece of the code?
I'm fine with the class 3. Again, that would be so egregious that we would use the loud noise decibel meter. And if it's one of those things, it's a repeat offender, maybe it might get someone's attention. But it's an option for us to utilize. It would not be our first option unless it's something that egregious, but it would be an option we could utilize.
So in the writing, in the draft that I'm looking at, every time I'm looking now on page 8 of 12 on the bottom left, or page 7 of 12 in the bottom center, section, it's B at the top of the page, so it's section 275-5 on the previous page, and then it's B, section B. It's just above 275-6. Yeah, right in there. So in that paragraph where we've got time of day and we've got decibels, it's my, it's kind of a question, but it's my observation that anytime we're talking about decibels, we're talking about using the noise meter.
Yes, sir.
And if we're using the noise meter, we're contemplating criminal side of it. The civil side wouldn't use the noise meter.
In theory, you could use the noise meter and just proceed with the civil violation, but yes, you are correct. Generally, where the ordinance is speaking of decibels, it's dealing with criminal violation.
Right, and doing that was what made this system work, because we have a civil side now and a criminal side. And largely it's going to be the civil side that's going to be the most operative part of the noise meter, of the noise levels here. I have a question, an observation. The readings of 75, that should it come to using a noise meter. And we're talking about measuring 75, exceed 75 dBA, that's decibels on the A scale, between 10 and PM and 7 AM in there. that's measured inside the house. We're talking about the closed house, not outside. And would you have a sense on what the typical ambient noise level is outside in a residential area in this town?
I would not.
So how did this number 75 come into being is what my question is, because I think it's too high. I'll tell you, I've measured it. And it's in between the high 30s and the middle 40s. Ambient noise level in the neighborhood at night during this 11. So if we're talking 75 inside somebody's house, we are talking about some serious noise going on. It is clearly going to be 70 greater than 75 outside the house. I mean,
But
there's
to-
an attenuation. And what I'm suggesting is, and this was a point that I made when it was previously discussed, there should be some statement in here to maintain the ambient noise levels in the residential neighborhoods.
That's pretty low. I mean, 65, I looked up, was laughing, you know.
Yeah,
and-
well,
And this is a this is criminal charges.
well, but before we get to negotiating those, the first question, where did these numbers come from that are in the? It's what was already in the city code. And how many violations have we had in the past 50 years? It's a rhetorical question.
Right. I,
Um,
like I said,
I'm
before,
concerned
since I've
we're-
been here 2 years,
Yeah.
it's
One.
been one.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
one complaint, so just a little concern. that
Well,
maybe
it's been one actual arrest or summons.
Summons. Very good. Mr. Smith,
I guess maybe 2 or 3 questions. How much do the decibel meters cost?
Less than 200, they vary, but for a good one, you can get around $175.
And how many would we need?
We would just do two, one on daytime, one on night.
And how often do they need to be maintained and calibrated?
Every year, you have to send them back for calibration.
Is there a fee for that?
There is a fee. I don't know the fee off the top of my head, but it's obviously less than buying a new one.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. If not, we'll buy a new one every year, I
Like
guess.
weed eaters, they cost more to fix than buying a new one.
That's correct.
The last, I guess is section 275-4, and now I'm on section G. This would be page 5 of 11. Yelling, shouting, whistling, singing between the hours of 10 and 7 in such a manner as to permit sound to be plainly audible or 50, et cetera, or 50 or more feet from the source of the sound. So is Jen, you're maybe 50 feet from me? Is that about maybe?
Yep.
So if you can hear me without amplification, I would be in violation of this ordinance. Is that correct?
At one time, I did take this up with the city attorney. And if you look at it, it says yelling, shouting. It doesn't say talking. So, but
Do
you,
we have a definition between yelling and shouting and talking?
well, of course, there's discretion in this and
Right,
just as there's
that's-
other things. Well,
That's my point.
understood, but we, would you allow somebody to yell at the top of their lungs without taking some action?
That's not what this says. If it's clearly audible, am I yelling now or am I talking?
Well, again, I think this just allows that if, say, I'm in a home apartment and I'm hearing maybe yelling, arguing, or constant, it gives us the ability to go there to listen and then have a conversation with the individuals about the noise and, again, bringing it down. If we have to come back, there might be something else going on that we need to address, but this just allows us that option to have that conversation, investigate and see if it's something more.
Understood.
Yeah, and I think that's the good part of this proposal is that the civil side of it, not measuring the dBs in there. I think the civil side is where it's going to be mostly used, probably now, I'm just speculating, 99% or better.
Absolutely, yes.
Or better. So I'm in support of that. Where I'm questioning though is when we throw these dBs in there, because I know what ambient noise level is, and 75 is way, way up.
To Mr. Olligood's question, so what you're saying is that you would then, in order, if you had an issue and you called the police would come to your house, you would invite the police into your house. You would close all the windows, close all the doors. The police officer would get out their decibel meter.
Not
And at
necessarily.
that point, they would measure,
Not
because
necessarily.
otherwise there'd be no case for a criminal offense.
Right, we're talking, but I'm thinking it's gonna be handled civilly.
Well, hopefully, again, I'm just clarifying.
But if it rose to that, if criminal means it rises to the level of being criminal.
I just want to talk through this because it's a 12-page noise ordinance for something that I wasn't sure was a problem. But what about generators? What if I have a generator and I live in a residential neighborhood and it has to run 15 minutes every 7 days or every 30 days? Not Kendall, because that's a medical facility, so they're exempt, the hospital's exempt. But a residential generator, which a lot of people have, and they have to run. What would that kick on for when that runs for 15 minutes? Churches have them, so on. Would that be a violation? Also, would it be a violation when the food delivery trucks come at 6 a.m. to Waddell? I know they can back up and beep, beep, beep. That's exempt, the backup noise. But they come and deliver food at 6 a.m. They deliver food at 6 a.m. at Maury River Middle School. They deliver, all of those, and those are residential, those are outlying areas. So I just want to be sure, again, we're not putting a 12-page ordinance in place that then it's like, we didn't have an issue.
Yeah.
We have an issue.
Chief, you want to respond?
Well, I would just say right now, if it's already occurring, that's not something we're getting calls on to address. So I don't believe that putting this in order would now create people to make that call. And again, as far as generators, I don't know if that's a generator that comes on just when the lights go out for emergency or it's running all the time. And if it is, we're not getting the calls on it now. So I don't assume, and that's something we can work out rather than.
Okay. I know some people, generators drive them crazy.
Right.
And generators do have to be tested. And so they
Absolutely.
kick on and run for a period of time. And that's what I'm referring to, not an emergency when we've
Right.
lost power but it's just, but there are some folks that have generators.
Absolutely. And again, it would just be one of those things. If it is a call that we get from a complainant, we go out, we investigate, we see what the issue is, and then we mediate and talk to the individual and let them know why it's like that, and hopefully be able to tell them it'll be an hour or so. And that's it. So we're there more to be that middleman mediator so everybody can have a quiet enjoyment of life. And if that individual refuses, then we have something that can bring them into compliance.
I would encourage council to think about it along the lines, would dare say, in the past week, everybody in this room has driven faster than 25 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone, which is in violation. So thankfully, the police aren't sitting on 25 and a half. But I think you've got a reasonable ordinance in front of you. And unless there are any other questions, would encourage council's consideration.
Yeah, I would be willing to move forward, except that I just want that one sentence. And I don't know if the right way is just to take off or for which the city has granted a permit, or clarify what that permit is, or
Other than an activity permit.
yeah, or is, in your opinion, is that clear that that doesn't mean an activity permit?
I would think you'd want to clarify that just.
Okay.
Just to be clear.
Yeah. That's
Or
my
could we
only-
just say city approved event?
Or a special permit? Because it would be a special permit to,
And that, any of that's
gathering
fine,
gets-
but
yeah.
if we want to, instead of rushing him and give him, a chance to
Bring it
look
back
at
later?
it. Yeah,
Sure.
right. I just want to get that right. That's my only concern, and I think everything else
I
looks
think we could
great.
Say permit
Well-
other than an activity permit.
Well, I think Leslie's suggestion is chew on it on your ride home this evening and come up with
Yeah, I
some
hate to put
eloquence.
you on the
And
spot.
No,
like
you're
that.
fine. I don't
So-
mind that at all. I'm happy to-
sometimes making the sausage doesn't produce the best product on the spot.
And we're not in a complete rush, but I do think the ordinance looks great.
And I'd like to see the DB numbers reduced to 55.
How do other council members feel about that?
No,
Not in a fraternity laden town.
Fair enough.
I like the fact that there can be some consistency here. And speaking of fraternities, Red Square would have music so loud that you could hear it clearly on Green Hill, on Lewis Street. But if somebody else in a neighborhood were to do that, other than a fraternity, then here come the police knocking. So if there's some consistency here, and this provides that guidance that we're treating everybody the same, then hopefully this will make that happen.
Absolutely. I think that will help, like you said, being fair and consistent and having some guidelines.
Yeah, and I definitely support all the words on the civil side. I think it's a great way to proceed. And there have been cases that made it to the Virginia Supreme Court that this gets around and the calibrated noise meter gets around part of that as well in there. So I think overall it's pretty good, except the 75 dB. There was a case, let me just share with you just for a minute there. I had an opportunity to do some research a while back. And I mentioned it at the last time we spoke about this. There was a noise case that was brought in Fairfax County involving the Dulles access road. And there was residential development near it. And the building code up there at the time, this has been several years ago, said that as long as the noise level measured inside the house was 40 for the people living next to the Dulles Road, then their house would meet the building code in there. And the 24-hour day measurement, 7-day-a-week measurement for that road ended up being, they hired noise engineers to do the measurement, was 65. 24 hours a day, 65 in there. And so the people who were living next to the road wanted to, one of the cases involved wanting to develop a piece of property that was in that same vicinity there. And then the 40 for the inside the house kicked in, and 65 outside the house, they just had to live with that because that was there from the highway. So we're talking about 65 inside the house. I think inside the house should not be regulated or be the 65. That's the number for inside the house that presents a problem for me.
and that's only for criminal. I mean, the civil is a lower standard.
Civil's not even 65. It's
Right, it's
Right.
it's just
audible,
talking. It's
Right.
wanted.
which I think makes sense to have. I mean, criminals.
That's why I'm
pretty
supporting
severe.
the civil side in there, but
Well,
not the 75.
I appreciate your lobby and your position. I don't know that there's additional members of council that support your position. And
What's the vote on? Let's see.
if you'd like to make a motion, please do so.
In there. And I tend to think I'll be the one vote again.
Well, I think it needs a little bit more refining on language. I think Nick made a great point that followed up on the point we made before about the class 3 to align with the Rockbridge County ordinance. They've got class 3, then it goes to class 2. And if you keep having violations, it can get to a class 1 if it's all in the same year. It seems to
Sure.
make sense.
There are two people that are interested in reducing it. Other members of council, can you weigh in to give staff guidance if you want to support that or leave it as is?
I honestly, what's the difference between a class 3 and 1, 2?
Chief?
It's gonna be a fine. I don't know the exact difference. I mean, I know class 1 is up to 12 months, 1 year. I believe a class 3 is probably no jail time, but I'd have to look at that. It's gonna be no jail time, just a fine. $500. Yeah, so there you go. I know it's no jail time. And I don't know, and maybe you can speak to the spirit of it, just looking at the 75 decibels on B I believe that's measuring outside.
And so
I'm okay with
Yes.
so a window air conditioner is 60. So if you have a window unit in your house, if you're really close to violating this, if you got a window unit and it's not working well and it's a little bit loud, it might approach 75.
It's kind of like driving 27.
So,
What did,
The question, I'm sorry, Nick, the question, the members of council support changing. The attorney can't come back with a change if all of council doesn't support it. Otherwise, we'll send it back to change it again.
I'm fine with changing it. The classes.
Okay. Anyone have an objection to changing it from a class 1 to a class 3 as requested? Very good. Mr. Betts.
and then what did folks think about moving section O in 275-4 up to the top, just so it provides clarity when reading through the code section?
Yep, I think that.
No objection to moving that. Same language, just different location. Anyone have an objection to that? Hearing none. Anything else? Staff have any questions for council, or is it clear as mud? Okay. Chief, thank you for being here and speaking to this. And I hope that you have less action on the code than you had tonight in the discussion about the code.
Yes, sir. Me too. Thank you all.
Next item on the agenda, reports and communications, Blue Ridge Resource Authority, Mr. Smith.
No report.
Main Street, Lexington, Mr. Smith.
Give me a sec.
Pass. We can go to the planning commission.
Quick report, Economic Vitality Committee, our wayfinding project that I mentioned last meeting is about 50% done. To your question from last meeting about the Gateway Triangle project, the cast concrete planters should be arrived and installed by the end of the month. The rest of the project should proceed pretty quickly after that. Also, Main Street is hosting Chamber of Business after hours on the 20th in the formerly known as Grand Furniture Building from 5 to 7 p.m. That's my report. Questions?
Thank you, sir. If you could touch on, it's in your other, wearing your other hat, outdoor, there's the dedication coming up on the trails, just to remind everybody.
The details of that haven't been quite nailed down yet, but the date is the 14th.
April
of
14th.
April. Be 3 locations, Marl Creek, up in Rafine at McCormick Farm. The second is on Woods Creek. I believe it will be, well, it'll either be at the Jordan's Point end or the Waddell School end. The third installation is at Foxtrot Trail by the Double Decker Pavilion in Glenmorey Park. The intent is to get the kiosks installed as soon as possible. So they'll generate, a little bit of buzz and publicity before the actual event. As soon as I get more details on that, I'll be sure and pass them along.
Terrific. April 6th will still give us time to get the word out and get people. Great distraction for those thinking about doing their taxes at the last minute. Planning Commission, Ms. Strong.
Planning Commission met last Thursday and we continued our discussion of accessory dwelling units. And there was a very good article in the News Gazette about that, which hopefully will generate interest and get people thinking about this so that we can begin getting some feedback from the community on what they like, what they don't like, what they'd like to see in the ordinance. But we've had great discussion and it'll take us probably another month or two to get through it before we have a draft ready of the ordinance. That's all I have.
Thank you, ma'am. Regional Tourism Board, Mr. Betts.
Rockbridge Regional Tourism offers a sponsorship opportunity for local tourism events occurring July 1st through December 31st, 2023 in Lexington, Buena Vista, and Rockbridge County. Rockbridge Regional Tourism Board will award monies based on the strength of the application, if the event will attract out-of-town visitors, and how well the event aligns with tourism goals and objectives for the entire region. Sponsorship funds totaling $15,500 will be dispersed on June 23rd. Applications open Saturday, April 1st, 2023. Applications close Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. Awards are announced the last week of May 2023. Guidelines and applications can be found lexingtonvirginia.com. Sponsorships. There's also going to be a media tour. Tourism will be host a media tour April 18th through the 21st. 8 journalists will explore the region's downtown and experience the culinary scene, breweries, vineyards, cidery, historic sites, outdoor recreation, and family-friendly attractions. And tourism met with Virginia Tourism Corporation's Sports Virginia Division and provide a tour of Virginia Horse Center. There was specific interest in continuing the USA BMX competition and as a possible venue for adventure races. Sports VA also expresses interest in VMI's corp training facilities and aquatic center. And one last thing, tourism budget approved the FY 2024 budget with anticipated projects, including the launch of themed travel videos, commercials on connected TV, and redesigned visitor guide and inspiration guide.
Be sure to send that file to Janie and thank you for all the many things that are going on with the Regional Tourism Board. It's a great organization and lots of good things going on in our community, as is reflected in our meals tax and lodging taxes. Any questions for Mr. Betts? Mr. Smith?
2.
Yes.
What's the operating budget for next year?
I believe it is close to $1 million. I want to say it's 981,000. It was a balanced budget.
Okay, so nothing going into reserves.
Not good. No, it was balanced. The expenditures met the revenues or the.
So revenues are 900 and something thousand.
I believe so. I mean, it was a balanced budget. I
Okay.
believe so.
All right.
I don't have it in front of me, but I believe so. I can say it was a balanced budget. Yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Betts? Very good. Mr. Ziegler, Raro.
The RARO Board of Directors met last Wednesday. Right now, we're focused on launching our spring sports. They're practicing right now, going to start games next month for the bulk of those sports. It's a time of year where we're getting a lot of fields ready, and it's a big help when the city of Lexington or the county provides dirt for our infields. We always appreciate that. So thank you. We're focused right now on some capital items. I think I shared with you all that our F-150 that we use to drive all around the county has approached 300,000 miles. We're not confident that it's going to continue to get the job done. So we are in the market to buy a new truck, a used truck, but new to us. And of course, we are grateful to the 2 cities in the county for providing us the ability to have carryover funds for the purpose of the truck, and then also for a storage building that we're looking at putting at Brubaker Field. And so, of course, you all are aware of that, but I'm letting the public know that went through the Planning Commission and all of that. We also are focused on the end of the month, March 30th till about April 4th is the window that we're going to be building that timber frame. And so the bulk of that time will be off-site out in Rockbridge Baths. And then April 4th, we'll be at Brubaker building that timber frame. And so we are very hopeful that we receive a grant locally from Brilliant. But if we do not, we appreciate all the support that we're getting from the community members, the city, and the use of the pickerel fund to help push that important project over the finish line. We also did approve our budget. Our budgets exceed $600,000. That includes 5 full-time staff, some part-time staff. Our budget has creeped up due to hourly wages, because we do pay our employees that monitor gyms, that referee, and so on. So we've had to account for those wages, and Jen helps our staff do all of that. But you know, a couple years ago, Chad Coffey came in, and we always had the reversible jerseys that lots of families remember, those reversible jerseys that get passed down from child to child. And we've gone away from that. We've tried to give, our athletes a jersey color for their team that they can wear to school or wear in the community. And we started that a couple years ago. And we always look for sponsors to put their name on the back of those shirts now. But that does have a little increased cost, because we're not asking families to go buy the reversible jerseys. We're providing them, hopefully offsetting the cost with the sponsorships. But so our budget also creeps up a little bit with that. But by and large, Chad Coffey and the team, they get a lot done. They get quite a lot done. And I may have just, did I say 5 full-time employees? I meant, dear O'Brien. Yeah, I do mean 5. I'm like losing count. Sorry. That concludes my report.
Maybe more. Thank you very much for that report, and all the good things going on in the community. And we're fortunate for Chad's leadership. He's doing a great job. One thing, just to appeal to friends and neighbors and the entire community, the timber frame is very much like, if you will, an Amish barn build and barn raising. And there's a tremendous amount of volunteer work that's been requested. And if you have it in your heart or capable of supporting financially or with food, they look to have approximately 100 plus volunteers each day and provide food for all of those. So feel free to contact Chad or the RARO office and provide some support. They're eager to have more hands. Many hands make light work. So thank you, Mr. Ziegler. Ms. Alexander, threshold.
No report tonight.
Very good. Maury Service Authority, Mr. Alligood.
Thank you. The board, MSA board, met this past Tuesday for a work session to begin taking a look at the budget for the upcoming fiscal year and to project what sewer and water increases we can potentially expect. And currently, the estimate for increase is MSA costs, and now the city adds a multiple onto the MSA cost. And I think the city was like 5%, 3%, somewhere in there. So, but somewhere, not 10%, but somewhere in there. So there'll be an adjustment on that, but the projected rates for the water and the wastewater for minimum users is roughly $2.10 a month times 12, 25-ish for the year. And then on top of that will be the city multiple to do that. And a little bit of this budget is starting to blend in some of these costs that I'd mentioned before, these multi-million-dollar costs for modernizing the water plant as well as modernizing the wastewater plant. And there's some expenses that otherwise would have been financed that are going to be blended in as much as we can and are included in this rate right now. We're still looking at the big ticket for the 90 million overall in there, but this basically doesn't have much of the modernization cost in it at all. So those are yet to come in there. So this is kind of going along by blending in a little bit of some engineering work, preparatory work. So that's what the projection is. So I would say maybe $30 a year for water minimum minimums increase. And then, of course, if you use more than the minimum rate, then your bill's higher. That would be the amount for the minimums. So that's where we are at this time. Everything's subject to change. There'll be a public hearing on all this when we get formalized. And next week, next Tuesday, in this room will be the monthly MSA board meeting at 5 o'clock.
Was there any discussion on increasing water rates more so that there wouldn't be as big of a shock in a couple years?
There has been, and that's still under discussion. And a little bit of that I mentioned is starting to be built in right now to reduce the shock, but it's hard to reduce the shock of 90-ish million bucks that you're going to spread out over 20 to 30 years in there. That's just huge in there. But there are some things that we can do to help soften it, and we're doing as much as we can early on.
Just didn't know if it sends a false sense of security that, $2.10 for a user.
Month.
Right. I just didn't know if that, again, provides a false sense of security for what's coming. So.
No.
Like 2 questions. Seems to be my favorite number tonight. What are the wholesale cost increases projected to the customers?
That's what it was. And that the city would take that and put the multiple on it.
So what percentage increase is that from? That's what I'm trying to understand. That's a number, but how much more is it from last year to this year?
4.2%.
Okay. And what's the staff increase in pay percentage?
The staff increase in
Yeah,
pay.
Salaries for MSA employees.
Salary. I'll just have to look that up. I've got it
Okay.
in there. It's a increase in pay for the staff. All right, so for the water side, it's $41,000 increase for 1 year. For the wastewater side, the increase is
I think you budgeted a 5% increase.
That's the question I'm trying to
Yeah.
answer. The percentage
Is-
increase of
is
salary.
70, it's 70,000, so 70 plus what I say, the 40,
Yeah.
so that's 110. So that's going to be 10%.
I believe it's a 5% that's been budgeted.
5% when you add them both together. I'm looking at wastewater numbers and water numbers. So when you add them both together, it's in the neighborhood of 5%.
Right.
Okay.
So does that mean that we're going backwards? I mean, if the cost to operate the water plant, the labor is going up, just the wages 5%, and of course, health insurance. And so personnel costs will be more than a 5% increase, and you're increasing revenue by 4.2. I mean, so are you attempting to build up some money to help towards that 90 million, or is that
Well,
not again?
Blended into the rates was for project support is what we're calling it.
Okay.
For project support for the water side was an additional $400,000 that wasn't in before. And for the wastewater side, project support is I think it's 250.
But either you can share the budget or ask Jordan to share the proposed budget with city manager, and he can disseminate it to the council to review some of these numbers and have a good understanding of what the future, at least near future is looking like for the
He
MSA?
provided, budget, this document that lists the fiscal years from, FY 22 to 24 is what we're talking about for this coming year. And there are projections out to 28 in there, so you can kind of see, what the flow is. And, so it's available.
No pun intended, I'm sure.
Right.
The flow. Mr. Alligood, relative to some of the business with the MSA, do you know where the articles corporations stand? I know they've been going back and forth amongst county and city, Buena Vista and Lexington. Is that on your agenda?
It wasn't discussed at the budget meeting for the projected rates, but it was briefly mentioned that we're going to be discussing that this next coming
Next
Tuesday
meeting? Okay. One of the things relative to the articles, it's been mentioned several times before. We're looking at $90 million, and our neighbors 6 miles down the road are looking at $90 million, and there could possibly be some synergies. I don't know that they need to be tied together, but I hope that as you're looking at the articles and the cooperation, I hope that you will, unless members of council object, carry the topic of collaborating or potentially seeking solutions for more regional to include the city of Buena Vista. May not work, but I think it's important that we talk and explore and see to provide some. I know one thing that's been important to you is redundancy, and that certainly could provide backup supply much more successfully than our current Morris Creek Dam. But as I say, unless members of council have any objections, that you can carry that topic and lead a conversation with your board at the MSA about possibilities for collaboration to reduce the cost to our community.
Sure, be glad to. Just a point of clarification. You mentioned 90 for the county and 90 for the city. It's really 90 for
No,
both.
not 90 for MSA and 90 for Buena Vista.
90 is
Buena Vista needs to replace their wastewater, and they also need to do some work on their water system.
what you're talking
Correct. No.
about. Yeah, no, BV has a.
Yes. We're attached at the hip with the
And-
county through the MSA.
And the 90 that we're talking about ish for MSA would be split, not necessarily 50-50,
Shared.
shared between the city and the county. And so the percentages for the overall total, right now, Lexington's percentage of the usage of the plant is 61%. And Rockbridge County is 39%. So if allocation is based on that usage, then, just multiply the 90 million times 0.6.
What I would deem a reliable source, I would share with you the wastewater price increases are 4.2 from the MSA. Let me see. The wastewater price increases are 4.2, and the water is 8.2.
All right, I was reading 4.2 off.
Yeah. Very good.
Two pieces.
Any other questions about the MSA, Mr. Alligood? For my report, just have a couple of points of interest. One, out of character for the chamber, the business after hours will not be the third Thursday, which is our usual meeting time, but will be the fourth Thursday, business after hours at Lewis Scale out on Nelson Street. So if you're so inclined, go enjoy business after hours and meeting some of your fellow chamber members. Wanted to congratulate Kevin Finch of Washington Lee on a great documentary on Wes Montgomery. If you're not familiar, I encourage you to Google Wes Montgomery, who is a great musician, and be on the lookout on PBS for the documentary that Kevin put together. I feel certain it will be of acclaim and award-winning in some fashion. Also a reminder, again, at our next two meetings, RARA is celebrating their 50th anniversary on April 29th. If you're in town and available, please make arrangements to celebrate the good work that started with what I grew up knowing as the church ladies taking care of people in town. Three women who were concerned about people's heating bills and rent and just generally people that needed help. And the church ladies would get together and through a series of phone calls, make things happen to make folks having a tough time for their time not to be quite so tough. Last night, VDOT had, they called it a public hearing, but it was more of a gathering and question and answer. And several people in the room were there, so I don't need to preach to you all, but those listening outside of here, the North Main Street improvement is coming. It will be messy and it will be a drastic change to our North Main Street. So be prepared for the future, which will include no parking ostensibly from the Triangle in front of the music shop and stop in north to Hook Lane. That will all change dramatically. And one of the things that requested comments that I had made and was encouraged from someone else was making sure that there's a reasonable transition for the bike lanes to riding with traffic. And the answer from VDOT was Sharrows would be the method for making people aware of that and sharing the road with bikes. So with bicycles. Lastly, B. Johnson had intended to be with us tonight. She's led a group with a petition with concern about the house on the corner of Randolph and Massey Street. And the city manager is aware of that and will be looking into it on our behalf. But thank B and all of the neighbors surrounding there who signed the petition and raising awareness of that house. It's noteworthy that the House City Council asked the owners and with the encouragement from, I believe, HLF for the house to not be torn down. There just hasn't been much progress made on the repairs to it. So the new owners are local, and I'm hopeful that with some encouragement, they will be able to make some progress on that. And I guess the one other piece, I received a couple of phone calls asking me who's bought the Lexington restaurant. And from one of the family members of the Edwards family, there are people of interest, but I'm not aware of any contracts. But there are two people that have expressed an interest and that they're negotiating with, but it has not been sold as of 4 o'clock yesterday. It was not under contract, I should say. And that is all I have for my report, and I'll call on the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a pretty robust report. I'll try and move through it expeditiously. In the fire department, C Shift hosted Dr. Jessica Mertz, the new emergency room director at Carillion, and her husband, Dr. Adam Mertz, who is a surgeon, for an important meet and greet with the department. Firefighter EMTs Matt Spencer and Jonathan Bowden have been certified as vehicle extraction and heavy technical rescue trainers. The Virginia Department of Health Office of Emergency Medical Services has recertified the department and EMS vehicles. This inspection included a review of procedures, record keeping, vehicle maintenance, and the vehicles and all the equipment and supplies they carry. And this certification renewals for 2 years. A small accident occurred, unfortunately, when a firefighter opened the door of one of the vehicles and it scraped a small section of paint off of an adjacent vehicle. Of course, this claim was sent to our insurance company. The department has begun to renew the renewal of the Pediatric Advanced Life Support Certifications, or PALS. Recently, a Girl Scout troop was hosted by the department, and a tour was provided of the department with various insights provided with regard to daily fire staffing and operations. Lieutenant Jared Hill is attending the week-long National Fire Service Staff and Command program. The program provides participants with detailed information about evolving issues in emergency services at the local fire and EMS service levels. And lastly, the annual testing of all 14,000 feet of fire hose began today. In Public Works, the Public Works Department is planning scheduled intersection improvements at Evergreen and Nelson Streets. This will involve new signals and a new control panel. The panel at Evergreen Street will control this intersection and the Walker Nelson and Washington Nelson intersections so that they all operate in sequence. In addition, they will be programmed for emergency vehicle preemption. This function permits emergency vehicles to automatically change lights as they approach these intersections, thus permitting them to more safely and quickly go through the intersections. This is a $160,000 project scheduled in the CIP and funded in the current fiscal year. The drainage project on Limekiln Road is underway. This project is scheduled to be completed approximately the first half of July. It includes 500 feet of 18-inch drainage pipe to collect water on the street, to reduce flooding of the street and to prevent runoff downhill onto adjacent homes. Bridge repair work on West Nelson Street over Woods Creek is scheduled for completion within the coming month. Concrete work is finished on Randolph Street and is ongoing on Washington Street. Final repair and replacement of the sewer line under Washington Street near the tourism office is occurring now and is scheduled to be completed next week, weather permitting. Washington and Randolph Streets, are scheduled for paving the week of April 4th. Specific information will be available regarding the timing of the work that as this date approaches, check the city website for more information. In the police department, be informed that tomorrow, Friday the 17th, St. Patty's Day, DUI checkpoints will be placed during the evening throughout the city. According to Chief Green, there have been some DUI stops recently that indicated levels of intoxication greater than what is normally seen. In addition, the department is using this as a training opportunity for newer officers who have seldom, if ever, done a DUI traffic stop. Please note, this does not in any fashion mean that we are seeing more DUI stops, only watching for those drivers that may have had one more than just a couple. So be on your best behavior on the 17th. The department completed a lock it or lose it crime reduction program. While many of us are still comfortable leaving our vehicles unlocked on the street, it does create an opportunity for crime. The department checked 427 vehicles and found 74 at risk and made 32 citizen contacts. Currently, the department has 2 vacant law enforcement positions. There are also 2 trainees in the police academy and a third ready to start in July. This is about as close to becoming fully staffed at the department as since June of 2021 when Chief Green arrived. During February, the department made 6 misdemeanor and 3 felony arrests and issued 59 parking tickets. During February, the department conducted 87 hours of foot patrol in neighborhoods and 42 school zone patrols during drop-off and pickup times. The department has begun review and implementation of the updated policy manual stemming from recent legal review. The Department of Criminal Justice has awarded the police department $157,000 in ARPA funds. The funds must be used for law enforcement equipment only. This well-timed grant will permit the city to make a significant investment in equipment replacement that otherwise would have come through local tax funds within the city budget. Speaking of the budget, the FY24 budget will be provided to City Council by the middle of next week, and we will then begin a series of budget review and work sessions and/or meetings on our way to budget approval. I would like to commend Earth Magic Glass Recycling in Buena Vista for continuing their great work recycling locally collected glass. Earth Magic has recycled over 4 tons of glass, and Lexington has contributed over half that amount, over 4,600 pounds, or over 2 tons of glass. So that's my report. But Mr. Mayor, if I may, I'd like to just take a minute or two longer and take this time to apologize to City Council and to the community. This Wednesday, yesterday morning, there was an event, an activity that I authorized on the north end of the community at the intersection of North Main coming into town and the bypass going outside of town. Because of that event, there was a significant traffic backup on the bypass, and it was due to my lack of complete overview or thorough overview of that event. And I do want to say to those who suffered some delays in going to school and to work that, of course, it was unintended. I will do my best to see that does not happen or similar issues do not happen again. I'm very sorry for that occurrence. So just missed that one.
Thank you, sir. Any questions, city manager? Very good. City attorney.
No report, Mr. Mayor. I did want to note, however, when we go into closed meeting, there is an issue that we wanted to add concerning consultation with legal counsel on a specific legal matter under 3711AA. I just wanted to mention that when we make that motion.
Okay. We'll add that to the motion. Very good. And before we go into any new business, Hearing none. Before we go into closed session, a couple of things. One, Chief Green, put you on the spot. If you would like to come up and at least enlighten council how the filming and what we should expect with the final components. Most of us aren't fully aware of the whole project, and if you could brief council would be terrific.
Absolutely. Yes. After that, obviously, I do apologize. It was on me, the North Main Street, again, being new to the area and one lane, didn't know that traffic would cause that congestion. Hindsight 2020, it will not happen again. Apologize. Thank you for your understanding and patience. We have finished filming. It was 2 days. I think they just wrapped up about 7 o'clock tonight. We did do a scene on Main Street downtown this afternoon, and it seemed very well received by the business owners. Lots of individuals came out there. I know I had at least 30 individuals sign release forms. It is going to be a video that is a two-part video. One is a police recruiting video, but we also are doing a video for kind of a marketing city, highlighting the great aspect of coming to Lexington, not just to visit, but hopefully to live and to work here to make this your permanent resident. So part of the recruiting video, we took places such as downtown and Jordan's Point area and the school in Richardson Park, just to show not just for the police side, but also the marketing side. So again, there were a few roadblocks that we did do. Main Street, unfortunately, was the most inconvenient one, but did not have any issues or hear any concerns with North Main Street and Jordan's Point and at the school yesterday. But it seemed to be great community support while we were out there. 2 weeks, around 2 weeks is when I'm told they will do the final editing shots, and then I'll hand it over to the city manager for him to present to you all for this project. Is there any questions you might have for me on that?
One question I have, Chief,
Yes,
is
sir.
whether or not this is something that can be shared, for instance, with the Chamber of Commerce specifically, as well as Main Street Lexington and regional tourism.
Oh, absolutely. When it's done, we want it to be shared everywhere, go out worldwide. We're waiting for our SAG Awards, Grammy Awards, all of that stuff. Yes. So please, we'll share it as much as possible once we get that back.
Terrific, terrific. Members of council have any questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you all.
Just a explicit direction to staff, city manager. If you can reach out to our tree board members who spoke tonight and follow up with them. One of the questions they had were measures that we would take to ensure that we do professional consultation and how we'll work to implement that professional consultation. And then also, if you can follow up with Ms. Johnson relative to her petition that she was unable to deliver tonight, but delivered, I believe, via email. And we'll look forward to seeing her, I'm sure, at a future meeting. With that, I hope everyone has a very happy St. Patrick's Day. We're all Irish tomorrow. And we will not be taking any action when we come out of closed session regarding the appointment of city attorney. That'll be part of our discussion. We will work, or that'll be on our agenda for the April 6th meeting, and we will take that business up at that time. So don't anticipate any business after this. You're welcome to hang in the hallway, and we'll call you back in when we open up. But if you also want to go home, please do so. And with that, Ms. Alexander, if you could read us into closed session.
I move that Lexington City Council will convene in closed meeting in accordance with section 2.2-3711 subsection A, paragraph 1 of the Code of Virginia, a closed session to discuss personnel and the appointment of a city attorney, as well as section 3711 AA, consultation on a legal matter.
A8.
A8?
Yes.
Okay. Section A8.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. I need a roll call vote. Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Sigler?
Aye.
Mr. Betts?
Aye.
Mr. Alligood?
Aye.
And I vote aye. We're now in a closed meeting.